we're seeing now is not just cuts and closures, but the wholesale dismantlement of our NHS, the NHS we own. And in its place, the government is bringing in American healthcare corporation models called accountable care organisations and accountable care systems.
Shame.
They have brought in a draft contract which, if it goes through, will allow all our services to be bundled up and outsourced to large healthcare corporations. The government are doing it already with our NHS land, our buildings and estates. They've privatised NHS estates, creating 2 private property companies that are now charging market rents to our hospitals, to our GP surgeries, to our clinical commissioning groups. And that is why they can no longer afford to operate.
To campaigners, NHS England's plans, with their demands for further cutting of services and hospital beds, were central to a strategy of deliberately creating shortages so that the public would turn to the private sector to provide them, thus furthering the development of a 2-tier public-private system, one for the better off and one for the less well-off.
Here is Japan, here at the top. You have 13.32 beds per thousand population. Number of hospital beds is a very important indicator. This is England.
It's about 2.7.
2.7. Compared with your nearly 14, we have less than 3. So if you understand, when people were talking about queues and waiting lists to get into hospital, when you go into hospital, you need a bed. If you're having an operation, you need a bed. And now we can see why, because we have far too few beds. And we have been losing them since May 2010 at the rate of 50 a week.
Given how notorious the American health system had become for its exploitation of people's health needs, I had found it difficult to believe that the NHS was in danger of being Americanised. But a young doctor's disturbing revelations helped make me think again.
I'm the one that on the wards, I have to tell the NHS patients they have to wait a few more days for their scan, a few more days for their chemotherapy, people with cancer, and yet the private patients go directly up. They're getting their treatment immediately. So I am seeing in real time right now today the emergence of that 2-tier system, and what the emergence of that means is that you start blocking care, you start blocking access to the NHS patients, you start blocking it to people that can't afford it.
I'll tell you this, we're going to block any trade agreement that gives a green light for US healthcare companies to come here and strip out and take from our National Health Service.
I wouldn't be here today if it were not for the NHS. We must prevent the establishment of a 2-tier system with the best medicine for the wealthy and an inferior service for the rest. International comparisons indicate that the most efficient way to provide good health care is for services to be publicly funded and publicly run.
So we said quite clearly,
Never!
we will end all the plans the Tories have to privatisation, and those that they've privatised will bring it back.
The party leaders were among the first to vote. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has spun the ballot as the Brexit election, saying a vote for his Conservative Party is the only way to get Brexit done. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says the election is the last chance to save the National Health Service.
It's a lot to take in. Just my feeling is that you have to keep fighting, because what else have you got?
Oh, God, what have you been privatised? This is 1979. Don't you dare lie to me!
In a decisive move in the NHS's dismemberment, Tory Health Minister Andrew Lansley's 2012 Health and Social Care Act had removed the minister's responsibility for providing healthcare for England's people. Over 40 years ago, the Tory party's secret Ridley report spelt out plans for privatising nationalised enterprises like the NHS by stealth. It is now clear how far these plans have progressed. They continue to be enacted without proper public knowledge or democratic consent.
So why didn't they tell us?
Because they didn't believe they could win an election if they told you what they were going to do, because people are so wedded to the National Health Service. It's the nearest we've got to a national religion. It's a kind of national sacred cow.
So the Tory position was the health service is safe in our hands, and we're just not going to tell you, we're going to
change it,
blow it up and start again.
Change it completely.
A sovereign state like Britain, with control over its own currency, creates and manages its own money. The 2008 banking crash had shown that it could, and did, create huge amounts of money when it wanted, without having tax revenues in hand to do so. The government had been able to use the publicly owned Bank of England to create tens of billions of pounds to bail out the bankrupt private banks at a stroke of a Bank of England keyboard. This flew in the face of the free-marketeers' long-standing dogma that the government could only spend what it had in tax revenues.
There is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayers' money.
If the government could create all this money to cover the financial sector's enormous needs, and without any adverse effects on inflation or the value of the pound, as the years since the crash had proved, why could it not do so for our society's needs? It was hardly surprising that campaigners felt that the free-marketeers' dogma was a fallacy, and that all that was really required to fully renationalise the NHS was the political will to do so.
We have to be resolute about it and clear about it.
After all, then Health Minister Nye Bevan had driven this through in 1948, when the country had more than twice as much national debt than now, and a devastated country and economy. Tens of billions of pounds could now be created by the government, as it did for the banks, to renationalise the NHS and still leave the national debt far below the 1948 level.
We've just got to be bold in this country and say, you've had your money, we want our NHS back.